Hello my friends, and welcome to the channel for another Escape from Tarkov video. This time with a bit of a look at the 7.62x51 weapons in Tarkov and my take on the top builds for this caliber. My idea for this one is to pick a few different setups that excel in their own specific way, ranging from the best budget 7.62 rifle to the best low recoil build, the most balanced setup overall, and the best full auto option. With the new ammo and armor restrictions on the flea market, 7.62x51 really stands out right now as one of the undisputed best rounds available in the 12.12 patch. Even the basic M80 round can be purchased from the traders pretty easily. It makes short work of pretty much any class 4 armor that most players are stuck with right now, and even against higher tier armor, it generally breaks through after only a few hits. There's a pretty solid variety of 7.62 rifles in Tarkov right now, and they each sort of have their own distinctive place in the hierarchy. So hopefully after this video, you'll have some nice ideas for how to focus your builds on these setups to get the most out of their own unique advantages. That's all I really have to say here in the intro, so without too much delay, let's take a look at what I think is the de facto ultimate budget 7.62x51 rifle in Tarkov. With a pretty low price point of just 50,000 rubles, the RFB is basically the cheapest way to get access to the 7.62 caliber in a nice modern package that can run 20 and 30 round mags, unlike the Vepr Hunter, which is stuck with 5 to 10 rounds. The RFB was kind of the awkward stepchild of the 7.62 family until the 12.12 patch, when recoil and ballistic changes turned this thing into one of the cheapest ways to deliver M80 rounds to your enemy's cranium. The RFB didn't really get a buff necessarily, but the stats and recoil patterns of everything else got changed enough that the RFB is now a much more viable choice. It's also helped that the price got slashed by around 10,000 rubles as well. My budget RFB setup is very simple, starting with the RFB thread spacer, which allows you to add muzzle devices onto the barrel. For my build, I usually go with the sort of budget suppressor, the Gemtech 1, which requires the 1 mount, and then you can just grab the suppressor off the flea market for a pretty good price compared to most of the other 7.62 suppressors. I then add an RVG foregrip for some cheap ergonomics, and a pair of MBUS iron sights for another little ergonomics boost. Finally, for the sight, it's always up to preference, but I've had good success running this thing with a Burris TAC 30 scope just set into the basic 30mm scope mount. You can swap this for whatever you prefer, and you can also add a backup red dot sight using some other mounts if you want, but this setup keeps it cheap and you get a pretty good 1 and 4 times zoom level. When all this is set up, I end up with 140 recoil and 36 ergonomics for a total cost of around 140,000 rubles, which is pretty damn good for a suppressed 7.62 rifle with a scope, and it's less than half the price of some of the other builds I'm talking about in this video. This is a great setup for large maps like Woods in the early game, farming rogues on Lighthouse on the cheap, and it's pretty solid as a PvP build if you can pace your shots a bit to compensate for the somewhat high recoil. Next up for this video, we'll be taking a look at what I think is the best low recoil 7.62 build, and for this one, we've got to go with the M1A, which has pretty much always taken the crown for the lowest recoil 7.62 setup in the game. The M1A is a long, heavy rifle. It's not the greatest for close range because it tends to get stuck on things, but when you just want something that can deliver the maximum amount of 7.62 rounds to your target in the shortest amount of time possible without hitting the ceiling by the time you're done shooting, not much can beat the M1A. With the right build, this is one of the few rifles in its class that can get below 50 recoil, meaning you can spam your trigger finger surprisingly fast while remaining on target. This, combined with access to good 30 and 50 round mags, gives the M1A a few pretty clutch advantages over some of the other 7.62 rifles. For this build, I tend to start off by either buying or bartering for the base M1A SAS build from mechanic level 3 or 4, as it's a simple way to get most of the base parts for this build, and it's about the same price and even a little bit cheaper than buying each one individually. Once you have the base of the build, the first change is to swap out the muzzle device for the KAC muzzle brake kit and the KAC PRS QDC suppressor, giving you maximum recoil control on the muzzle device. Keep this suppressor in mind because it's going to be used on pretty much every other build in this video. Next, for the grip, I think the two best choices are the SE5 Express grip for a balanced build or the RK1 foregrip for the little bit of extra recoil control, and that choice is up to you. For the stock, first we're going to swap out to the SI Advanced Buffer Tube for the extra stats. You can also swap over to the Mesa Tactical Buffer Tube if you have it unlocked, but that's a very late game attachment, so I'm just going with the Advanced Tube for this video. On this build, I've got the Magpul PRS Gen 3 stock, which has the highest recoil reduction that can fit onto the M1A, and it's one of the key parts for getting under 50 recoil. Then I add an F1 skeletonized grip, and now all you really need is a scope. On this setup, I have the JP 30mm mount with an EOTech Voodoo scope, and then a Delta Point reflex sight up top as a backup sight. This combo is pretty expensive, but overall one of the best setups in the game in my opinion. If you want to save some cash or you don't really need a 6x scope, just swap this for whatever you prefer, or just a simple red dot sight even works as well. When this is all put together, I end up with 47 recoil and 30 ergonomics for a total cost of around 340,000 rubles. It's definitely not a cheap build, but in my opinion, it's one of the top builds in the game right now, so if you have 340k lying around, I highly recommend trying this out. Next up for this video, I want to take a look at my pick for the most balanced 7.62 rifle, the SR25, a rifle that isn't necessarily the best in any one category, but has a very appealing balance of recoil, ergonomics, price, and availability. The SR25 doesn't have the lowest recoil, or the highest ergonomics, or the cheapest price, but it has such a nice balance of all three of these things that it's my personal favorite of the 7.62 rifles, and many other people agree with me on this one. This, plus the simple fact that it's a gorgeous rifle to look at, it has some of the best sound effects in the game, it can be purchased on the flea market, and it isn't 6 feet long with a suppressor like the M1A, just makes the SR25 such an awesome jack-of-all-trades rifle that's really only limited by the 20 round mags that you're stuck with. To get one, I pretty much always just pop open the flea market where the price is between 70 to 80,000 rubles most of the time. Just make sure the durability is good and you're all set to start building. First up, just like the M1A, we're going to add the KAC muzzle brake kit and the PRS suppressor for the best overall stats on the muzzle device. Next, I swapped the handguard out to the RSAS handguard for some extra stats, and this also allows you to add the JP Gas System 6 for even better recoil. After adding a pair of RAHG rails, I go for the SE5 Express foregrip, and then a tactical device of some kind like my trusty X400 flashlight. For the stock, we're swapping out to the SI Advanced Buffer Tube and then adding an MOE carbine stock and the rubber butt pad for extra stats. The best pistol grip option is the Graal S, so I add that as well as the Ambi charging handle for ergonomics, and the SR25 should come with backup iron sights as well, but if not, just grab a pair from Mechanic. Finally, for the scope, I'm pretty much always running the JP 30mm mount with a Voodoo scope and a Delta Point reflex sight on my modded out rifles, but again, if you want to save some cash or you just don't need a 6x scope, the SR25 will work pretty well with whatever you choose with a sight. When this build is all done, I end up with 64 recoil and 48 ergonomics for a total cost of around 310,000 rubles. Like I said, it doesn't have the lowest recoil, the highest ergonomics, or the lowest price, but it all comes together with a really balanced set of stats, and the price isn't too outrageous, especially if you opt for a slightly cheaper scope setup than the one I like to run. For the last setup I want to go over in this video, it's honestly kind of a tough call as to what the best full auto 7.62 rifle is, because overall they're all pretty similar, and I could honestly make a video just comparing the three full auto 7.62 rifles, the MDR, SA58, and the SCAR H. Overall, each of these setups is pretty awesome in their own right. The SA58 is by far the cheapest, the SCAR H can get pretty decent recoil, and my pick for the best overall in this section, the MDR, only really wins out for me because it combines full auto with some great ergonomics and an overall short length, which makes it easier to use in close range fights. After I show the MDR build, I'll leave up a modding view screenshot of the SA58 and SCAR H builds that I recommend, because I honestly think all three of these setups are well worth recommending, but for this video, I'll be specifically talking about the MDR as my full auto 7.62 rifle of choice. First things first, the only real way to get a 7.62 MDR currently is to either buy one outright from Peacekeeper level 4 at a price of 1400 USD, or to find one in raid or as a scab case reward, which does limit its availability. The SCAR H is in exactly the same situation at roughly the same price, though the SA58 can be purchased on the market unlike the other two. The first change you'll make is to swap out for the KAC muzzle brake and the PRS suppressor for better recoil. After that, you need a pair of M-LOK rails for the handguard, and I add the SE5 Express grip for a good balanced build and some kind of tactical device. After this, you really only need a scope, and for this build, I've got the JP 30mm mount, a Voodoo scope, and the Delta Point reflex sight as my backup as per usual. After this, you only need some backup iron sights for extra ergonomics, and this setup is complete. One of the best advantages of the MDR is you only need to add a couple parts, so it's a really quick build. With this build, you end up with 92 recoil and 58 ergonomics for a total price of around 350,000 rubles, so about on par with the M1A build. For a quick comparison, here's the SCAR H with roughly the same build, which ends up with 73 recoil and 32 ergonomics for about 350,000 rubles. And finally, here's the SA58 that I like to use, ending up with 91 recoil and about 33 ergonomics for a total cost of around 280,000 rubles. Some might prefer the Scar H for the lower recoil or the SA58 for the cheaper price, but I think the MDR edges them out with nearly double the ergonomics, and the short length means the MDR is a bit easier to use at close range where the full auto mode is actually most useful. Well, that pretty much covers it for the builds that I wanted to look at in this video. The only one I kind of omitted is a pure ergonomics build, mostly because I intend to cover some high ergonomics builds for different calibers in a separate video, but also because you can sort of turn any of these into high ergonomics builds if you want, and I think overall a more balanced approach is the best way to go. I didn't really touch on the G28 or the RSAS, but they're both very good setups as well. The only real problem is that they're radically overpriced compared to other builds with roughly the same stats, so I mostly recommend them to people with enough money to just use them to flex on their bankroll. I hope you found this video useful, or at the very least entertaining, and if you haven't been running 7.62 rifles yet this patch, maybe this can be a bit of a motivation to try them out, because I promise you will not be disappointed. In any case, let me know what you think down in the comments, and feel free to debate me on what you think the best 7.62 build is. I love the chance to have those discussions, so let me know what you think is best down in the comments. Thanks for checking out the video. I've got links to my Twitch stream, Discord server, and Patreon page down below for anyone interested, and until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.